Hey crew, it's Fit, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are diving back into the book of Second Kings, and today is definitely one of those days that if you have not been following along, you want to go back and figure out where we're coming from the beginning. Because I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I'm holding an unconventional Bible study, and it may not be going where you think it's going. With that being said, if you have been following along, we are in Second Kings 18, because we left off in Second Kings 17 with Ahaz, and he was a pretty terrible person through the eyes of God, right? He did not in any way comport himself in the way that God wants anyone to. But his son, however, Hezekiah, is a faithful man, the first faithful king that Israel has had. Let's dig into it. In the third year of the reign of Yeshua, son of Elah, over Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 29 years. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. Now, I take contention with that because he went beyond what David did. David David was really good at lip service. We have gone over David extensively. I'm not going to get into David much anymore, but David was not a righteous man at all in any period of his life, with the possible exception of the Goliath incident. But oh, Hezekiah, however, goes above and beyond. He removed the high places. That is the first time we've heard of a king doing that. Shattered the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah poles. He also demolished the bronze snake called Nehushtan that Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had burned incense to it. We have gotten into this snake before. We talked about this in Exodus and how I believe that the snake symbol has been maligned in large degree. That the snake in Eden is more of a representative of the taking of knowledge, which was the sin there. It wasn't the disobedience, it was the learning that sin was a thing. That was the problem, that you became self aware after eating this fruit, and that this serpent has been representative of an evil thing, but without the serpent and the apple, there would be no humanity as we know it. There would be no free will as we know it. We would be animals living mindlessly. And so there's a lot there that's wrong. When we were in Exodus, we saw that the Israelites traveling through the desert were afflicted by vipers, and that in order to keep people from dying, Moses had this thing crafted for them to look at. Now, this is one of those acts of faith that we talk about all the time. Like, if you believe in something enough, it becomes a real thing. That's why this whole thing has been such an effective thing forever. But he takes this stick, probably his staff, and on it is placed this bronze serpent. And we're going to do something that we haven't done in a while. We're going to look at the word, because it was interesting to me. And I was like, that's a name. And that's an interesting name, right? The snake called Neshutan. That sounds an awful lot like another word. So I'm like, let's see if there's any references to Satan, because that's what it sounds like. Neshutan sounds like Satan. And this is a snake on a stick named Neshutan. Well, this Nekush right here, this first part of the word, means bronze. That's where I went for the first. Well, I must have closed out the first part, but I looked up this part. It comes from the same as Nekosheth right here, which the Nekosh right here also means bronze. This is not the same word. It is a slightly different word, and in order to figure out the difference, you got to look right here. Now, Hebrew reads from right to left, so we're looking at this backwards from how we as English speakers would read it. But this right here, these first three letters, is Nekush right here. It's the same right here. That's what this was doing for me. And so I wanted to find out what this one is. And so I looked it up because that's what you can do, right? This is what a word study is for. And it means jackal. And I'm like, well, that's a little weird because it's not a jackal on a stick, it's a snake on a stick. And so we look down, and it's an unused word. The definition is jackal. Most of the time it is used that way, but it also has some other things. Well, that's not a jackal at all. Dragon and whale, however, is how it is recorded in the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. And that makes sense. That bronze dragon that you put on a stick. Now, this is also comparative to Tenanyan and to Leviathan and various other things, but this dragon on a stick that Moses made to give people the faith to live in the desert, that's a big deal. Not only is that a big deal, right? Moses made this thing for people to look at, and we talked about that in Exodus, and we're not going to really dig back into that any more than I already have. But for up to that time, the Israelites had burned incense to it. Is a big deal. Because it is bad enough that they are using as their object of faith, instead of the tabernacle and the fire that is leading them through the desert, they got to have this snake on a stick. But they have, for generations, continued to burn incense to it. That is worship. That's what that is. That is why worshiping in the high places and burning incense under the trees, that's why it's such a big deal. They burned incense to the Leviathan, to Shatan, to the dragon. Now, I know what the reason is. We've talked about it before, because the things that they record at their level of understanding. We'll get into that with the prophets a lot more, but that is a truth, right? We've talked about levels of understanding. And once you achieve a level of understanding, you're responsible for it, right? Their level of understanding, this thing that they saw a thing in the sky. And the only representative of this thing in the sky that they saw, and this is in Moses' time, was fire in the form of a snake, right? And so once that was gone and they were still in the desert, they needed a visual representation. And that's where I believe, in my conspiratorial mind, that is where the snake Neshutan comes from. It is extremely interesting to me that it is pronounced this way, and the Romanized Satan, it's very similar. And phonetics play an important part in what we do. It's why we went through the I am study. Like the whole study of I am is because phonetics are important. The fact that they are burning incense to Satan, to Shatan, not Nehushatan, the snake on a stick, the serpent climbing the tree, is a big deal. They have been doing this since Moses, however. And Moses is the lawgiver. Moses is the one that told them to do it. Moses is the one that told them to do it. If you look upon this stick, you will be saved. Now, people tie that stick and the caduceus and the snake and the reptile or whatever it is to Jesus on the cross. And we will deal with that later, because now is not really the appropriate time for it. I want to point it out because this is what they're talking about with that. That is Nehushatan. Just saying. Nehushatan. Nehushatan. The snake on the stick. But he got rid of it. He did more than David, Solomon, and all the rest of them combined, right? Israel broke off after Solomon and became its own idol-worshipping country named Samaria. Should have been. They were no longer following Yah at all. But Judah played lip service up to Ahaz, which was Hezekiah's dad. And Ahaz was not a God-fearing man in any way, but Hezekiah, somehow, his son, is. I will take that, because if you have a bad enough person, they will turn you the other way. But this is the only king that they get. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. No king of Judah was like him, either before him or after him. He remained faithful to the Lord and did not turn from following him. He kept the commandments that the Lord had given Moses. Now, we have talked before about the commandments, and we will talk again about the requirements here, but let there be no mistake whatsoever. Hezekiah waded in blood too, not people's blood, right? He waded in animal blood again. He brought back the sacrifices in massive amounts, and we will deal with that in Chronicles, because this is one of the few cases where there is an actual expounding upon things in Chronicles, right? Some parts of Chronicles are very extensive, and then some parts is like, well, we recorded this part in another book, and we recorded this part in another book, and you get very little again. You get the same basic story that we're getting here for most of the kings. Some of them get expounded. That's why we're going to do Chronicles, even though it is like the first part of it's a large part of genealogy, and I don't like doing those. We're going to do it, though. But he does keep the commandments, and that includes the sacrifices, and they start off in spectacular fashion. There is a lot of blood spilled. And you know, the entity likes that a lot. And the Lord was with Hezekiah, and he prospered wherever he went. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and refused to serve him. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its borders, from watchtower to fortified city. Now, he rebelled against the king of Assyria. Again, this is them saying, okay, we are going to become our own thing. Edom did it, and it was a problem for Judah, or for Israel. And Moab did it, and it was a problem for Judah. But now they're going to do it and expect it to not be a problem for Assyria, because, you know, we're the chosen people, and that makes everything okay. Now, the way it ends up is very interesting. He rebelled against the king of Assyria. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its borders, from watchtower to fortified city. And again, they never fully subjugate Gaza. That is always traditionally held in the same hands of the same blood of the same really big, tall peoples, right? And in the 4th year of Hezekiah's reign, which was the 7th year of the reign of Yeshua, son of Allah, over Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, marched against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of the 3 years, the Assyrians captured it. So Samaria was captured in the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hosea, king of Israel. The king of Assyria exiled the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Halah, in Gozan, by the harbor river, and in the cities of the Medes. We talked about that in the last one. This happened because they did not listen to the voice of the Lord their God, but violated his covenant, all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded, and would neither listen nor obey. In the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked and captured all the fortified cities of Judah. So Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent word to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me, and I will pay whatever you demand from me. And the king of Assyria exacted from Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the royal palace. At that time, Hezekiah stripped the gold from which he had plated the doors and doorposts of the temple of the Lord, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So, C and D, let's see what these weights are, right? 300 talents is 11.3 tons, and 30 talents is 1.13 tons. So, just over 1 ton of gold and 1 1/3 tons of silver. In order to bribe the person he had rebelled against. They were supposed to send tribute. They decided not to send tribute. And then the king came asking for his tribute. He destroyed all the fortified cities. Well, that's another problem, right? So now there is no Judah. Judah is submitted again, right? Ahaz did it. Hezekiah's dad, he did it. Uh, he begged them to come down and save him, so they did, and they made him a vassal. Again, this is not a sovereign nation. They they have been at one point, and he thought that he would be again. He thought that because he reinstituted the sacrifices and was wading in blood, and that he was following the ordinances and the commandments in the way that they were written, and he did. He thought that he would just be able to defend his land. Well, that was the covenant. Right? That was the covenant. He was the only righteous king of Israel. Like, righteous as in keeping the law, not as in an actually righteous man, right? Nobody is a righteous man, but he was actually striving at least as hard as Saul, even a little bit more. And does him and his generations get blessed? Not necessarily. Like, there is a wondrous thing coming, that a great miracle happens. There is salvation and deliverance, but where was it when all the cities were falling? Where was it when he had to extract all this gold from which he had plated the doors and doorposts of the temple? That was replacement gold. It had already been taken once. All of these things came because his father bowed the knee to the guy that he just rebelled against. That's where all of this stuff that he gave away came from. And so, while he did absolutely turn Judah into God, right? He called people back to the service of God. He got rid of the worship in the high places. He did all the things he is supposed to do, including getting rid of this icon that they have been worshiping for the entirety of Israel. And he didn't get his city saved. Somebody's mad. That's okay. The king of Assyria attacked and captured all the fortified cities of Judah. All of them. Except for Jerusalem, which we'll get to in a minute. Nevertheless, the king of Assyria sent the Tartan, the Rapsodians, and the Rapshakeh. Those are titles in the military, right? It's like a general, commanders, and like the ranks, along with a great army from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem. So Lachish is just outside of Gaza, and Jerusalem is to the northeast. They advanced up to Jerusalem and stationed themselves by the aqueduct of the upper pool, on the road to the launderer's field. And then they called for the king, and Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna the scribe, and Joash, son of Asaph, the recorder, went out to them. And then Rabshakeh said to them, or the Rabshakeh said to them, "Tell Hezekiah that this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. What is the basis of this confidence of yours? You claim to have a strategy and a strength for war, but these are empty words. In whom are you now trusting that you have rebelled against me? Look now, you are trusting in Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff that will pierce the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such is the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is he not the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed? Saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar in Jerusalem." Wait, what? That's an interesting bit of revelation in the middle of this story. That is not a normal part. What do you mean that's their God? Is that how it's known? That's how it's known. That's how the king of Assyria, who talked to Hezekiah's dad, knows him. And he has just taken over the entire place, and that's how he knows him. There's a reason for that, because they have had the high places the entire time. They have never been gone. They have always worshipped in the high places. And that goes back to the Baal Zephyr, all the way back in Exodus. We trust in the Lord our God. Is he not the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can put riders on them. How can you repel a single officer among the least of my master's servants when you depend on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Now, that's a whole different argument, because this isn't recorded here. We will probably deal with that when we get into Chronicles. But what was the commandment about Egypt? Do not go back for horses. That was the commandment for the Lord, for the king specifically. So now, was it apart from the Lord that I have come up against this place to destroy it? The Lord himself said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. And then Eliakim, son of Hezekiah, along with Shebna and Joah, said to Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Do not speak with us in Hebrew, in the hearing of the people on the wall. But Rabshakeh replied, has my master sent me to speak these words only to you and your master, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are destined with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine? And then the Rabshakeh stood and called out loudly in Hebrew, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you from my hand. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord when he says, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for this is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and come out to me. And then every one of you will eat from his own vine and his own fig tree, and drink water from his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, so that you may live and not die. But do not listen to Hezekiah, for he misleads you when he says, the Lord will deliver us. Has the God of any nation ever delivered his land from the hands of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Nevah? Have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the gods of these lands has delivered his land from my hand? How then can the Lord deliver Jerusalem from my hand? But the people remained silent and did not answer a word, for Hezekiah had commanded, do not answer him. And then Hilkiah's son Eliakim, palace administrator, Shebna the scribe, and Asaph's son Joah, the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and they relayed to him the words of the Rabshakeh. Now, all right, we have talked before about how they break apart the story for a particular reason, right? This particular story, we're not going to get into it, but if you come into 2 Chronicles and right around 28, I think, 29 is when we start dealing with Hezekiah, and it gives you the detailing that we will get into later, where he diverts the waters. He diverts waters to come into the city of Jerusalem from a different source, and he works to prevent those waters from going downhill. But where does this king, not the king, the representatives of the king, where do they gather? Where's it at? I know it's in here. The launderer's field, right here. All right, so they stationed themselves by the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. So they are by a source of water. This source of water is not the same source of water that is referenced here whenever Hezekiah diverts water into their place. Now, conspiratorial mind time. This is pure speculation time, but we have seen twice someone in the service of God change the waters. They turned water that was bitter into water that was sweet. I wonder if possibly it would be something you could do to make water that would make somebody sick without necessarily letting them know that they were getting sick. And if they thought that this source of water was the source of water for the city, they would be okay with drinking that source of water. Next to the launderer's field. Now, it's broken up for a reason, because this is an act of God. And it may be, like, that is pure speculation, but it is tied. There is a reason. We just don't have it recorded. We don't have a recording of what the reason might be. But he brought in a different water source before these people came. And that could be on the inspiration of God. Let's get into it. On hearing this report, King Hezekiah tore his clothes, put on a sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord. All things you're supposed to do. And he sent Eliakim, the palace administrator, Shebna the scribe, and the leading priest, all wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, to tell him, this is what Hezekiah says. Today is a day of distress, rebuke, and disgrace. For children have come to the point of birth, but there is no strength to deliver them. Perhaps the Lord your God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to defy the living God, and he will rebuke him for the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, lift up a prayer for the remnant that still survives. So the servants of King Hezekiah went to Isaiah, who replied, tell your master that this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of the words you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him so that he will hear a rumor and return to his own land, where I will cause him to fall by the sword. So that is the will of the Lord expressed. I will cause a rumor to make him return to his lands. And when Rabshakeh heard that the king of Assyria had left Lachish, he withdrew and found the king fighting against Libnah. Now, Sennacherib had been warned about Tirkah, king of Cush. Look, he has set out to fight against you. So Sennacherib sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, give this message to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you by saying that Jerusalem will not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Surely you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the other countries, devoting them to destruction. Will you then be spared? Did the gods of the nations destroyed by my fathers rescue those nations? The gods of Gozan, Haran, and Rezpah, and of the people of Eden and Telassar? Where are the kings of Hamath, Arpad, Sepharvaim, Hena, and Ivah? So Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it, and went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord, O Lord, God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim. You alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You made the heavens and the earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. Listen to the words the Sennacherib sent to defy the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to these nations and their lands. They have cast their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, the work of human hands. And now, O Lord our God, please save us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. And that's how you appeal to a narcissist. Now, let us remember that the cherubim are part of a communication device, right? That is how Moses communicated with God, the entity who was leading them. And so this has been before a way to talk to God. They used to have I forget what they're called, but it was the yes no questions, and that was part of the whole thing. But this was a thing that could happen too. You could go, just like you could go to a cave located in a specific location, and you could make a request to a specific device, and somebody would hear you and respond. The same thing was true with the ark, the cherubim. So he goes to the cherubim where the spirit resounds, and he asks, "Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to these nations and their lands. They have cast their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, the work of human hands. And now, O Lord our God, please save us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God." And then Isaiah, son of Amoz, sent a message to Hezekiah. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I have heard your prayer concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria. And this is the word that the Lord has spoken against him. The virgin daughter of Zion despises you and mocks you. The daughter of Jerusalem shakes her head behind you. Whom have you taunted and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride? Against the Holy One of Israel. Through your servants you have taunted the Lord, and you have said, with my many chariots I have ascended to the heights of the mountains, to the remote peaks of Lebanon. I have cut down its tallest cedars and finest of its cypresses. I have reached its farthest outposts, the densest of its forests. I have dug wells and drunk foreign waters. With the soles of my feet I have dried up all the streams of Egypt. Have you not heard it? Long ago I ordained it. In days of old I planned it, and now I have brought it to pass, that you should crush fortified cities into piles of rubble. Therefore their inhabitants, devoid of power, are dismayed and ashamed. They are like plants in the field, tender green shoots, grass on the rooftops, scorched before it is grown. But I know you're sitting down, you're going out and coming in, and you're raging against me. Because your rage and arrogance against me have reached my ears. I will put my hook in your mouth and my bit in your mouth, my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will send you back the way you came. And this will be a sign to you, O Hezekiah. This year you will eat what grows on its own, and in the second year what springs from the same. But in the third year you will sow and reap, and you will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And the surviving remnant of the house of Judah will again take root below and bear fruit above. For a remnant will go forth from Jerusalem, and survivors from Mount Zion. With the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. This is what the Lord says about the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow into it. He will not come before it with a shield or build up a siege ramp against it. He will go back the way he came, and he will not enter this city. I will defend this city and save it for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. I missed the declares the Lord on the side. And that very night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 men in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. And one day, while he was worshiping at the temple of his god Nikrosh, his sons Adaramelech and Sharezer put him to the sword and escaped to the land of Ararat. And his son Esarhaddon reigned in his place. And so, he did not leave on a rumor. Now, the army was not called away on a rumor. He killed them, right? And we can get into whether it was actually the entity or whether it was the prophet acting on behalf of God. Either way, it doesn't matter. I believe either one is possible. So it really doesn't matter. I do, however, know that the entity does like a lot of death. And he likes to be responsible for the death. But we don't get the details on this right here. I'm not sure if we get it in Chronicles or not. I haven't done the dive that I'm doing here in the Chronicles, but 185,000 men. Like, that's a lot. Like, we talk about a lot about the numbers, right? 185,000 people, all dead in the middle of the night. Now, it could very well have been an angel. He could have come down and chopped, or smote them all with a word. That is entirely possible. Hezekiah could very well be serving the correct entity. I don't think so, because of the bloodshed that is involved that doesn't really get talked about here, but does get talked about in Chronicles. Like, there's a lot of blood. So when he goes and says that I have been faithful, he is saying, I have been sacrificing to you. And so he gets his miracle, one way or the other, whether it's poisoning the waters and after he has already diverted, or if it is a direct intervention by an entity called down by the prophet of God. Either one of those is possible. It could have been the entity that he was talking to. Isaiah could be an entity. I don't know. But 185,000 men dead in the middle of the night is a big deal. He didn't say it out loud, though. Why? Like, he says, I will put a hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will send you back the way you come. And he says that you will not enter the city or not come up with a shield. You won't shoot an arrow. He will go back the way he came. He will not enter the city. Okay, you're talking about the ruler by himself, but why was it not said right here? I am going to strike down your army tonight. That would be the boldness of proclamation of God, right? That would be the bold prophecy. Not that I'm going to send you away on a rumor and the army remains. And they're still in danger from an army of 185,000 people. Like, that's a lot. That is a lot of people. He told him, I'll give you 2,000 horses if you can put 2,000 people on it. And in those days, Hezekiah became mortally ill. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, came to him and said, This is what the Lord says, Put your house in order, for you are about to die, you will not recover. And then Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, Please, O Lord, remember how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion. I have done what was good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. And before Isaiah had left the middle courtyard, a word of the Lord came to him, saying, Go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, that this is what the Lord, the God of your father David, says. I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. I will surely heal you. On the third day from now you will go up to the house of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life. And I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. Wait, is this the same thing? Is this the same army? Is this the same fight? It says in those days, so maybe it's Chronicles 32. Let's pop up real quick just to 31, 32. What was the numbers on that? 31, 32, 24 through 31. So that's going to be right here. 24. Became mortally ill, prayed to the Lord, give him a sign. But because his heart was proud, Hezekiah did not repay the favor shown to him. And therefore wrath came upon him in Judah and Jerusalem. That's interesting. The Lord saved Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem from King Sennacherib of Assyria and all the others. He gave them rest on every side, and many brought offerings to Jerusalem. This is after the deaths, right? That's interesting. And this is where I was talking about blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon and channeled it down to the west side of the city. This timeline change and shift is a little bit strange, but it doesn't really specify whether this is him being attacked again after the 185,000. I'm going to assume it is not. I'm going to assume that this should have been probably before we got to this whole section here. We should have probably dealt with this, but they like to break it up because then it doesn't make as much sense. And so he says, I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. So we do know that Isaiah is there. And then Isaiah said, prepare a poultice of figs. And so they brought it and applied it to the boil, and Hezekiah recovered. So the boil was his mortal illness. That's interesting too. And then Hezekiah asked Isaiah, what will be the sign that the Lord will heal me and that I will go up to the house of the Lord on the third day? And Isaiah had replied, this will be a sign to you from the Lord that he will do what he has promised. Would you like the shadow to go forward 10 steps or back 10 steps? It is easy for the shadow to lengthen 10 steps, that answered Hezekiah, but not for it to go back 10 steps. So Isaiah, the prophet, called out to the Lord, and he brought the shadow back the 10 steps it had descended on the stairway of Ahaz. And so we get again into one of the conspiratorial parts. This is an active study today, y'all. This is a recorded event in other places. This backing up of the sun 10 days is recorded in other places for different reasons. The reasons are whatever the rulers can justify it to be, right? And the fact that this would happen could be known because foretelling and prophecy are real things. You need to be in alignment before you attempt any of those type of things. You need to be in alignment with the 8 laws of creation before you attempt any foretelling. And that is why it is banned. But the prophets use it all the time. And so it is not impossible that this prophet would have known this ahead of time. That he may have even gotten the revelation walking away, and that is why he went back. All of that is a possible thing. But the actual act of the shadows turning backwards is recorded elsewhere. We're not going to get into all of those today. You can do the research for yourself, but it is out there to find. Gil Broussard, for one, records some of these things and talks about them when he's talking about Nibiru. And that might set off some flags for you, but oh well, we've already talked about Joshua's day, how his day was extended, and how I believe that is because of the plasma trail from the sign. Joshua was inspired, somehow, to do the things that he did, and he did them well. Hezekiah was inspired at the brown, like in the same manner, right? With this, not quite the same zeal, because he didn't kill as many people, but he definitely had a lot of blood. And so this sign is visible in the sky. I believe it is the same type of sign that we will see shortly. The end times are upon us. And that the prophets all describe this thing that you see in the sky. And one of the things about this thing that you see in the sky is that sometimes it is close and sometimes it is far. There is a natural cycle that it follows. It is traceable, trackable, and there is evidence throughout history. Again, check with Gil Broussard for some of those. Check with Suspicious Observers for some of those. And the Thunderbolts Project for some more. Like, these things are trackable and traceable, and you can see the evidence of them. At one point, we had a 365-day year. Perfect circle. And then sometime it changed. I believe that when it changed was either here or with Joshua, but it was us passing through the remnants of this thing, whether it is a planet that passes or whether it is the galactic current sheet. We didn't get quite close enough for it to do the thing that it is about to do for the 12,000 year cycle, but it was one of those little mini cycles. And we got really close to it, and it affected the physics of the planet the same way it did in Joshua. There is a correlation to be had from Noah to Joshua, Joshua to here, and from here to Jesus that leads into these patterns, and then from that to where we are now that leads into the bigger pattern that will be happening soon. Remember when Jesus died, there was an hour of darkness, right? That was the same stuff affecting the same stuff. And so I think in my conspiratorial mind that whatever it was, the plasma effect that stilled the planet for Joshua and didn't allow the turning, turned it backwards a little bit. It's not an impossible thing. Would cause a good bit of distress, but not impossible, considering what is coming will be a great shaking. The heavens will be disordered. The stars will not have their locations in the sky. They will move all over the place. We will not be able to orient ourselves. The sky will roll back. We will not see the blue skies for 3 whole days. All of these things are talked about there and talked about in other places. They all tie together. It's all talking about the same thing. It's one of those nails that I have to hammer because this is coming. This big one is coming. It is soon, but it's not here. There's no need to panic until you see that sign in the sky. When you see the thing in the sky that everybody gets upset about, that's when you start worrying. Okay, and at that time, Merodach Baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and gifts to Hezekiah, for he had heard about Hezekiah's illness. And Hezekiah received the envoys, and showed them all that was in his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the precious oil, as well as his armory, and all that was found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his palace or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. And then the prophet Isaiah went to King Hezekiah and asked, "Where did those men come from, and what did they say to you?" "They come from a distant land," Hezekiah replied, "from Babylon." "What have they seen in your palace?" Isaiah asked. "They have seen everything in my palace," answered Hezekiah. "There is nothing among my treasures that I did not show them." And then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your fathers have stored up to this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, said the Lord. But some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, will be taken away to be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." But Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good." For he thought, will there not at least be peace and security in my lifetime? And as for the rest of the acts of Hezekiah, along with all his might, and how he constructed the pool and the tunnel to bring water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Hezekiah rested with his fathers, and his son Manasseh reigned in his place. And that is where we are going to wrap this one up. Now, I know that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I tend to step on toes, and while it is not intentional, I do not apologize for it. There's a lot in here that is pure speculation, and I am fully willing to take the flak for it. There was never a sin required for your forgiveness, or there was never a sacrifice required in blood for your forgiveness for sin. And because of that, I have to stand where I stand. Now, you can be blessed. You can be blessed while you're doing wrong. We have seen that in the Chronicles or in Kings, for sure. We can see your entire bloodline be preserved, despite the fact that you break a lot of commandments. But it's not really preserved. And then what do we see here? What is today's lesson, right? First off, we had to deal with the snake on the stick. That's a big deal. Then we get the only righteous king. Like, he's the only one that actually does the things that are required of him. And then he is beset, besieged, loses all of his cities, and is surrounded and besieged in his own home city of Jerusalem. The people die. Now, there's an awful lot of sacrifice that leads up to that. But after that point, it appears Hezekiah, after being preserved, after losing all the fortified cities in Judah, after the entirety of Israel is taken, and Gaza is conquered, and Egypt is destroyed, right? Not destroyed completely, but like, that's the narrative. I dried up the rivers of Egypt with my feet, right? After all of that, this army comes to your gates, and your God kills them. 185,000 dead without you lifting a sword, which was the covenant. It was. You don't get the promised land. You don't get to be preserved, although you are of the line of David, so tangentially your line is preserved. But by being the one true king of Egypt, of Israel, what you get after serving all of this blood, you get afflicted. Now, in Chronicles, apparently that is because of his pride. After God has spared him by killing an army of 185,000 people at his gates without him lifting a finger, somehow he turns then and doesn't follow the ways of God. For that, he has to be punished. I mean, it's not the fact that you were faithful through all of this. It's because you turned away after having your faith proven. Now, that would be a good justification for pulling it, right? If you were God, and this man has reinstituted all of the laws that you told him to do. He has built up the reserves of blood for the first time in a long time in the proper manner. And you strike down these people and receive that sacrifice in that manner. And then he gets all snooty. Yeah, I guess you would. How is it possible, though, that within the same lifetime, once again, we are seeing the turning away from the workings of the miracles of God? This king himself witnessed it and turned away. Maybe it was the water source. That's an option. I'm here to point out options. Like, none of this really matters to me. It does because I was ingrained in it. I grew up in it. This book is infused in my bones, and I was wrong about so much for so long. This walking through here and talking about the things that are actually in here makes you have to realize just what we're talking about. Right? When they weren't committing the sacrifices like this, they were being blessed. When they do return, he loses the kingdom. And he doesn't lose it in his time. And there's a whole different lesson to be learned from the fact that Hezekiah is like, well, if the kingdom goes away after me, that's fine. But for I'm going to be remembered well. That's pride and arrogance, all right. That is definitely that. That's not a man who has witnessed God kill 185,000 people for him. I can tell you that. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. There was a lot to get into here today, and I know I stepped on some toes, and I'm not sorry for it, but I hate that it happens. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You're perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.